Hello and welcome to another edition of the Mayor Dan Paletko Show. I'm very pleased to have as my guest today our state senator, David Knezek. Senator, thank you for joining me.
Appreciate you having me on, Mr. Mayor.
Now, I think one thing that's very unique, you are a complete local product of Dearborn Heights school systems, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, like I said, I was born and raised here in Dearborn Heights. My dad was a police officer here in the community for 24 years. My mom was a lunch lady at Crestwood High School when my brother and sister and I were there. So growing up, we actually attended St. Linus School over on Hass and Evangeline. I went to Crestwood High School, graduated in 2004, and then actually completed my undergraduate education over at U of M Dearborn. So not that far away. The whole family is still here in the area. And I grew up on Lafayette Street, right down from what used to be the Dairy Dream, one of the places I worked in high school. Our parents relocated to Evangeline when I was in the 7th grade, and then currently I live right behind St. Sabina on Arnold Street.
So I think it's one of the reasons I like you so much, because I'm a local product too. I grew up on Kinloch and Hass, but a lot of the same school systems and even the same college. So and I think that gives you a unique and a very close feeling for what Dearborn Heights is all about and the history of it and what our people really enjoy and want and what they're looking for. And it reflects itself in your voting patterns.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too because, you know, for I think the last maybe 2 or 3 senators, we haven't had a senator who's been from the community of Dearborn Heights. And so for me, it's given me a really unique opportunity to advocate for the community, to talk about the values that we share here in Dearborn Heights, and to bring understanding to the legislature about what makes us so unique is also what makes us, in my mind, so special. So the district that I have is 5 cities: Detroit, Dearborn Heights, Garden City, Inkster, and Redford Township. 270,000 people. It's a very diverse district, culturally, ethnically, racially, the whole 9 yards. And so I think it puts me in a really good spot to be able to advocate for everybody and to give a voice to whatever issues they may be facing at the time, particularly for the folks here in Dearborn Heights, because it impacts me on a daily basis being a resident myself.
And you started out as a representative and then went to the Senate. So you've been in the legislature, what, 6 years now, 5 years?
5 years right now. So next year will be my 6th year. It'll be the end of my first term in the Senate. So the 2-year term in the House, 4-year term in the Senate. And obviously not to get political on the show, but I'll be on the ballot again next year. And if I'm advanced through by the voters again, it'll be my last term. You can only do 2 4-year terms here in the Senate because of term limits in Michigan. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to serve again, but it'll be the last time that I have the chance to serve in that capacity.
Yeah, and that's really a shame, because term limits, in fact, I just recently ran into Senator Steve Beda, and he got elected to the legislature in the House the same year I did, and he's done, I believe. This is his last term.
His last term,
and all that knowledge and background that he has now will be lost by all the residents of Michigan.
Well, that's the point that we try to drive home to people. And I understand that when we talk about term limits as an elected official, there's no way that you can talk about it without appearing to be self-serving. So I understand that. But the knowledge that you just spoke of, somebody like Senator Beda, who's been serving for 14 years, when he leaves, it's all the way back to square one. And somebody has to start with very little to no experience in government. I say to people all the time that the state legislature, the House and the Senate, is the only job in the state of Michigan where we value inexperience. We would never go into the courtroom and say, give me the least experienced lawyer that you have. We would never go into surgery and say, I want the least experienced surgeon that you have. But here in Michigan, we want the least experienced elected officials making laws, passing laws on our behalf. And unfortunately, what I think we've seen here in Michigan is really short-sighted legislation, because folks know that in 5-6 years they're going to be out the door anyway, and it becomes somebody else's problem. Nobody's thinking about the long-term implications of the policy decisions that we're making in Lansing.
It's kind of interesting. I went to a Michigan CPA meeting, and our guest speaker was Skubik. I know that when I got elected, the whole caucus said, if Skubik comes around you, avoid him, because whatever interview you give him, you're going to look bad. But actually, I got to know him, and we got to be somewhat of a friendship. But he was a guest speaker, and he asked all the CPAs, and most of them had their own practice. They were partners, people with at least 20 years experience. And so he said, how many of you are for term limits? And most of the hands went up. So I went around, and he grabbed one guy, and he goes, are you a better CPA now or when you were in brand new, came out of college and were in your third year as a CPA? The guy said, well, there's no question about it. I'm much more informed, knowledgeable. I know so many things that I didn't know as a young CPA. And he said, well, don't you think in the legislature it's the same way? He took another vote after that interchange.
Totally different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
People got it. They said, oh yeah, experience means something in a whole different way, because by the time you go through one term, you're really learning. Second term, you may be able to be effective. And then a lot of the people in the House, the third term, they were looking for jobs because they knew they were gone.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, when you put those term limits on folks, I think it's done with the idea of we can move out the old and bring in the new. You don't really get rid of those elected officials. They just get shuffled around and moved into a different position somewhere else, maybe a county commission spot or what have you. But what's unique about term limits in Michigan, and you already touched on it, is that the politicians are the only ones who are term limited. The people who are not are the lobbyists and all the special interests around Lansing. Absolutely, the bureaucrats as well. And so they have such a greater level of power now in the state, because they know if this politician comes around and they're giving us a hard time, well, we just have to sit and wait out the clock, and they're going to be gone. And so it makes the governors, the executive branch, even more powerful. It makes the judiciary even more powerful, and it takes away from what should be the voices of the people, which are their state representatives and their state senators. I tell people all the time, when I got elected, you know, I was very fortunate to be elected at a young age. It really wasn't until year 4, like you said, where I really felt that I knew the appropriate places to push and to pull and who to ask and where to go to try and get resolution on an issue. If I'm fortunate enough to serve a second term in the Senate, I'll be 35 years old. I'll be completely term limited from the Senate for the rest of my life. And that 10 years of experience will be lost for the residents of Dearborn Heights, Garden City, Inkster, and Redford Township.
Now, we're in the middle of House terms and Senate terms. What is on the legislative agenda? What do you see as still happening in 2017? And of course, 2018 is an election year, so probably all the stuff will happen after the elections. But what is coming up, and what's the legislature looking at?
So first I'll talk about something that just passed in the legislature. Passed in that it's over, not in that it actually passed. We've been talking about, and I've been talking about for a number of years now, the fact that auto insurance is way too high here in the state of Michigan. And we're trying to bring about a resolution on that issue to give some relief to Michigan residents. Particularly those of us who live here in southeastern Michigan, we pay rates above and beyond what everybody else in the state pays. And the reason for that is a practice that's called redlining. And redlining is a formula that the insurance industries use to calculate your auto insurance rates. Now, when I say to people on the streets, do you think that your driving record should affect what your auto insurance rates are? Everybody always says, yes, of course. I say, well, what about your zip code? Should that affect your auto insurance? They say no. I say, what about your credit score? No. What about your age, your level of education, your gender in some cases? And folks say, well, that has nothing to do with whether or not I'm a good driver. Why would I want that to go into the process? And I explain to them, redlining gives auto insurance companies the ability to set your auto insurance rates using factors that have nothing to do with whether or not you're a good driver. And we here in Dearborn Heights in southeastern Michigan, we pay higher rates simply because we have a 48127 or a 48125 zip code. And so we had the opportunity to lower some auto insurance rates if we did legislation the right way these last couple weeks. But what you saw was a huge flood of money and influence and strong arming from the auto insurance industry, because they don't want us to take away what for them is a real cash cow. We said we wanted to bring in fee schedules on hospitals so that they're not gouging individuals when they go to have procedures done. And everybody agreed to that. We wanted to do a fraud authority so that we could make sure that the insurance companies weren't fraudulently claiming things that had or had not taken place. And what you saw when you read the legislation was, okay, we'll have a fraud authority, but you can only go after fraud in the healthcare industry. You can't go after fraud in the auto insurance industry. So where's the fairness in that? And then the insurance industry said, we're not going to do anything on redlining. We want to keep that ability to increase your auto insurance rates arbitrarily. And the last thing that I had been arguing for was the fact that if you're a senior citizen and you qualify for Medicare, you have a medical benefit through Medicare, you're also being charged that medical benefit through your auto insurance as well. And so what we were trying to say was for seniors who have Medicare, who are qualified in receiving that coverage, they should not have to pay for the PIP, the personal injury protection, when it comes to your auto insurance rates. For some seniors, that could lower your auto insurance rates by 40% if you had a comprehensive plan. If you had a basic plan, it could lower it up to 80%. We pushed for these things, these common sense things, but as you know, I always say that common sense is not a common virtue in Lansing. And the insurance industry got their hands into it and completely bungled the entire thing. And so we had a great opportunity to lower auto insurance rates here in Michigan, but unfortunately, special interests got involved, politicians got weak-kneed and didn't want to stand up and do the right thing, and so now we're all going to continue to lose moving forward unless we take some action in 2018 or beyond to actually bring about lowering our auto insurance rates. So that's probably the biggest thing. The last thing that I'll share, and I don't want to talk for too long, I don't want the folks at home to be bored with me.
Well, I think everybody would love to pay less in auto insurance, so I don't think you're at all boring them. But
right.
I will share with you real quick, when I was had my own CPA practice and looking at bills where people would share things and ask me, I was amazed how you talk about these zones that these insurance companies have.
Right.
And I looked at what this individual was paying, and they were on the Detroit East Dearborn border. I am not exaggerating, it was $2,400 more than if they had lived, let's say, in Canton.
Yeah.
A year. I
Yeah.
mean, $2,400, and now it's probably every 6 months, $2,400. It was that great a differential.
I had a gentleman that I met a couple months ago, 25 years old, lived in the city of Detroit, worked at Ford Motor Company. He was paying $550 a month for his auto insurance plan. Cranes, the business magazine here in Detroit, had a really great article the other week called At the Intersection of Mack and Morass, where one of the Grosse Points meets the city of Detroit. And you just talked about that sort of territorial rate setting. If you go onto one side of the street into Detroit, you were paying a rate that was 300% higher than what the base rate was.
Yeah.
And if you went to the other side of the street into the Grosse Point, I think you were paying maybe 57% lower than what the base rate is, just because of which side of the street you live on. And so again, I say to folks, if you're a good driver, if you're a bad driver, that should be the only thing that goes into setting your auto insurance rates. But again, unfortunately, it came up short. I hope we take another crack at it in 2018 because this issue is not going to go away. The last really major issue that we're going to be taking a look at going into December here in 2017, though, is what we would call OPEB or other retirement benefits for municipal employees. This is an issue that we took a look at back in 2016. There was such overwhelming opposition from municipal employees, police officers, and firefighters. In fact, they came up to Lansing, over 1,000 strong one day, to protest these cuts that were going to have to be done to their pension and to their retirement health care. And so because of that outpouring of opposition, the issue was killed in 2016. Governor Snyder then did something that I give him tremendous credit for, and that was to say, the issue of these unfunded liabilities, these long-term liabilities that a city has, are not going to go away. So we do have to do something, but let's bring everybody to the table to have that conversation about what that something looks like. So they brought together cities, they brought together townships, every police officers group, every firefighters group, and Democrats, Republicans, senators, representatives, and they all sat down for a couple-month period, and they developed a plan that every single person affixed their name to. Every Democrat, every Republican, police officers, firefighters, municipalities, townships. And they said, here is a solution that we all agree to. And at that point, it should be a slam dunk. A couple months went by, however, and 2 of the Republicans on that group decided that they no longer wanted to be a part of that consensus that everybody had agreed to. And so what they're proposing now is the elimination of health care for retirees. They want to do some tweaks to what that pension benefit looks like for police officers and firefighters. And so from a 40,000-foot level, I remind folks, who are the politicians always the first to go after when they're up for election? Whose support do they want to earn first? Always police and fire. They want a picture, they want an endorsement, they want the whole 9 yards to try and secure their vote and their support. And now we have politicians who are in Lansing and they're trying to turn around a complete 180 and stab our police officers and firefighters in the back and take away a secure retirement and take away those health care benefits. The thing that also is concerning to me is you look at other cities across the state who have already made really tough decisions. Dearborn Heights, Inkster, Garden City, communities who already have made really tough decisions to try and bring about stability within their retirement system. The state's not going to recognize or appreciate those tough decisions that have been made. They're going to say, here's an arbitrary line. If you're not at this line by this date, the state has the ability to come in and take over your finances. I think that here in Dearborn Heights, we know what's best for us. We work with our police officers and our firefighters to make sure that they have the coverage and the protections they need, while they are also providing us as citizens with coverage and protection that we need. And I don't think it's the state's business to be coming in and arbitrarily trying to take over our finances. So it's an issue that's coming down the pipes at the end of this month and going into December. We know that we're going to have another big rally at the Capitol with police and fire and municipal employees to try and push back on that. And we're hopeful that we'll get enough pushback that the issue will get killed again in 2017. And we can again go back to the drawing board to try and push forward with that comprehensive solution that everybody agreed to.
Well, I'm glad to hear what your opinion is on that, because I've felt for the longest time that those decisions need to be made on the local level. And there's a multitude of differences even within municipalities and townships, counties, and our pension plans are, the general government one is over 80% funded, and the police and fire almost 100%. So we've done the responsible. I've tried to set money aside, a few $1 million for future health care costs, but those are decisions that are best settled at the collective bargaining table, and not necessarily by somebody in Lansing who thinks they know what the answer is. And then because communities are different, and how they get funded is completely different. And we've implemented Public Act 152, and I heard the outcry from employees who, and did we really need to meet those Lansing parameters? No, we didn't, but we had to, because the law said you have to, you can opt out of 152, but you can only opt out so long, and then we were like an island onto everybody else, so we had to fall into line. But those have huge consequences on police and fire, and it's like not too long ago, I still, worst day of my life as a mayor was when Officer Minkowski passed away, but the whole community was very concerned about what was going to happen to his family, what was going to happen to his young boy. And we took care of that situation, but now with changes in Lansing, we might not be able to. And I don't think when the general public becomes aware of that fact, because these men and women put their lives on the line, and we feel an obligation to them because they save our lives, they do so much good, that we want to make sure that they have a safety net if and when they run into problems. And this legislation completely destroys that.
Right, and like you said, I hear from my colleagues in Lansing all the time the words local control, local control, local control. And then when the time comes to actually make a decision that would give local control over an issue, the legislature seems to want to pull back and take that away.
I know. I find that so ironic because I ran into the same thing when I was up in Lansing, and then it was, we're for local control. However, and it was that however, it's like, no, let them make their decisions. You don't have the best. And now when you consider term limits and everything else, and really, there isn't as much support and funding. And you look at, because one of the things I was going to ask you was roads. I mean, we really haven't solved the roads, although you would have thought a couple of years ago that we had a solution. But no, I don't think the money has started flowing into any of us.
So I'm glad you asked me that question, because I love to talk about this issue, because I think, again, it highlights the shortcomings of the legislature when people who don't understand how the funding formula works or where the money can or should come from are put in the positions to make those decisions. Just really quick to say, too, on the issue we were just talking about, the health care, the retirement piece, the two legislators that are advancing that legislation have been in office for 6 months now, and they think that they know best. They've spent no time talking to anybody else to get to learn the issue. They're just trying to steamroll forward with what they think is a solution. With what you said about the roads, though, I will say this. In 2015, the legislature passed what they would call a road funding solution. And I tell folks all the time, whether it's in person, at my coffee hours, or in the mailings that I do to the district, do not plan on any roads being fixed in the state of Michigan, because the plan that was adopted in 2015 is nowhere near a plan at all. So let's look at what they adopted. It was a $1.2 billion investment that was supposed to go into roads. Where was that money coming from? $600 million of it was supposed to come from increased gas taxes and increased registration fees. So mind you, the political party who's all about lower taxes and less government always finds a way to increase taxes and the size of government on the backs of people who can probably least afford it. So $600 million in increased fees and increased taxes. The other $600 million comes from, and I quote, future unspecified general fund cuts. Meaning, we don't know where it's coming from yet, but sometime down the line, somebody else is going to have to figure it out. What's critical also when you look at that legislation, adopted in 2015, phased in over a 6-year period. So it gets fully implemented in 2021. Why was it phased in over a 6-year period? Well, what's the term limits for a member of the House of Representatives? 6 years. So they knew that even if a freshman were to vote for that, 6 years later, they would no longer be in office, and it would be somebody else's problem to solve. The biggest thing that I wish we would start talking about when it comes to road funding is the formula that we use to distribute those funds. PA 51, Public Act 51, is the formula that's used to distribute those funds. And unfortunately, it uses a linear formula to say, if you've got a mile of road in southeastern Michigan, or if you have a mile of road in the Upper Peninsula, you get the same level of funding for both of those roads. What's unique about us down here, of course, is that we have 500,000 cars driving on that road any given day, a ton of trucks with very large weights going on those roads every day. And so they're beating on those roads at an even greater rate than what would be happening elsewhere in the state, but we're not getting a level of funding that reflects that. The other thing, too, is that this $1.2 million, this is for state trunk lines. This isn't for municipal roads. If you're a township where you get most of your money from the county, this isn't going to help you at all. And so I tell folks, don't let these politicians lead you wrong and tell you that we've got a solution to road funding, because as far as I'm concerned right now, there is not a solution. And when we talk about municipal roads and state funding for the cities, this is where it all comes full circle. Whether it's on the municipal employees piece, the police officers, the firefighters, the roads, the state of Michigan has failed to invest in our communities through revenue sharing, both statutorily and constitutionally. I mean, you tell me, as a mayor, how long do you think it's been that you've been
you're preaching
the
from
short
the
end?
Bible that I would have think so, but I'm so glad that you're up there and are able to articulate our viewpoint up there. Got a lot of challenges, and I need to bring you back as a guest again, because there's a whole bunch of subjects that we didn't even get a chance to touch on. that I'd love to pursue with you, but we're running out of time, and want to thank you for being a guest on my show today. Sure. And keep up the good work, and want to thank the audience out there for watching another edition of the Mayor Dan Paletko Show.